Okay, can everybody see this and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I have been giving a series of presentations on the topic of finding joy through life's challenges, and this is actually part 6. So first of all, we use the word happiness and joy interchangeably, but there is a difference, at least in the root meaning of the words. So if we take happiness, it is based on our circumstances. The root word is hap, which means luck or chance. So something happens to me and I'm happy. So I win the lottery and I feel very happy. So that's the root of the word happiness. Whereas joy is based on our internal state. And the root word is simcha, which means rejoice. So it's something I choose to do. So whatever is happening externally, I can find joy within me through the choices that I make. And if we read some of Father's words, he explains that joy comes from love. Joy is the origin of heart and emotion, and his purpose is to create joy, but one cannot feel joy alone. By the way, I am repeating things because even though some of you may have heard this many times, but I need to kind of get the foundation right. The greatest joy, it comes from the exchange of love between subject and object partners. So this is a picture of my daughter and my granddaughter. And I would say that my daughter's, I would say she feels a lot of joy having a grandchild.
Having a daughter.
A granddaughter, yes, a granddaughter.
No, it's my granddaughter, but.
Oh, yes, okay, sorry. And but if we also read the divine principle, it says joy arises when we have an object partner in which our internal nature and external form are reflected and developed. So this is my granddaughter. If you look at her face, well, it doesn't have to just be my granddaughter, but if you look at any baby's face, you can feel within yourself your own nature when you look. It's like a reflection of your own nature, the purity, the innocence, the humor. This is a picture of our cat, Morris. And the cat in many ways is quite human-like because if you stroke it, it like its eyes close and it purrs. So I could see myself in the way it responds to love. But of course, the divine principle is full of technical words. So I'd like to look at some other words which we're more used to. For example, to feel empathy with. When we feel empathy with someone, we can feel as they feel because it reflects something in ourselves. And also to resonate. If you resonate with somebody else, you actually can feel what they feel. Like two tuning forks or two guitar string will resonate if they're on the same chord. And to identify with somebody else, if you identify, you say, yeah, well, I can identify with how you feel because I feel like that. Or we feel a connection to somebody because of the way they feel and we feel the same. Okay, so this topic is about finding joy through life's challenges. And much of the content comes from the Book of Joy, in which the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they talk about what joy means. This was on the occasion of the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday. And when Desmond Tutu went to Dharamsala in northern India, where the Dalai Lama lives, and they were interviewed by Douglas Abrams, who's a writer. So let's look at today's topic. Okay, so life's challenges. They identify fear, stress, anxiety, frustration, anger, sadness, grief, despair, loneliness, envy, illness, and adversity. What they're saying is that we experience suffering. We can't avoid suffering in our life in whatever form it comes. The question is, how do we deal with it? Can we find joy when we experience any of these? So they've come up with 8 pillars of joy: 4 qualities of the mind: perspective, humility, humor, and acceptance, and 4 qualities of the heart: forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. Last time I talked about gratitude. Today, the topic is compassion. So I have two questions. How does compassion, having compassion, give us joy when facing life's challenges? Yeah. Can we actually feel joy through our difficulties? And secondly, how can we develop a compassionate heart? What is compassion? So this is Mother Teresa. Of all the people in the world, she's probably one of the most famous for her deep compassion, taking care of dying and sick people. And here she's holding, looks like a very malnourished child. So what is compassion? Well, in essence, we could say, well, it's suffering with, but I'd like to give a more detailed definition. We could say that compassion is a sense of concern that arises when we are confronted with another suffering and feel motivated to see that suffering relieved. Of course, compassion is also an expression of love, but this is specifically to do with identifying with people's suffering and showing love for them. And we could say there are like three parts to this, because empathy is when you feel what another person feels. And that leads to this compassion where you are motivated to see that suffering relieved, which leads to acts of kindness. So you could say there are three parts. If you have no empathy, it's hard to have compassion. And if you have compassion, you want to do something. And so what kinds of acts of kindness express compassion? Well, it can be a simple smile, a kind nod, listening patiently, a loving hug, or wise counsel to kind of give some kind of advice and support. The Hebrew word for compassion is rachamim, and this comes from the root word for womb, rechem. And so the Dalai Lama, he often says that, in his own childhood, the love of his mother, the compassion of his mother, that sowed a seed. And so you could say, even in the womb, the baby is receiving this compassionate love. And what are the benefits of compassion? Well, when we talk about suffering, we can say that suffering comes from always thinking about yourself, me, me, me. So if you have a problem, whatever it is, but if you focus on it, that suffering won't go away. It just intensifies. So when we alleviate other people's suffering, we reduce our own suffering. This is kind of the miracle and the magic. When you give to others, when you share their suffering and you do something to help them, even if you've been worrying about many things, but once you invest in another person who has maybe similar problems or other difficulties, it can relieve your own. And endorphins are released in our brain when we show compassion. When we help others, we often experience what is being called helper's high, as endorphins are released in our brain, leading to a euphoric state. The same reward centers of the brain seem to light up when we are doing something compassionate as when we think of chocolate. The warm feeling we get from helping others comes from the release of oxytocin. And this hormone seems to have health benefits in the reduction of inflammation in the cardiovascular system. And so it makes our heart happy and healthy. And also, compassion is contagious. When we see others being compassionate, we are more likely to be compassionate. And recent research by social scientists Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler suggests that there is a ripple effect that can extend out to 2 and 3 degrees of separation. In other words, experiments with large numbers of people show that if you are kind and compassionate, your friends' friends, and even your friends' friends are more likely to become kind and compassionate. So, the Dalai Lama is known to be a man of compassion. And when he travels around the world, probably his main topic of the conversation is compassion. He's written more books on compassion than any other of his books. And this is a picture of him comforting a young survivor during his visit to the tsunami devastated region of Sendai, Japan, on November the 5th, 2011. And he's actually written many things about compassion. For example, he said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. The purpose of all the major religious traditions, is not to construct big temples on the outside, but to create temples of goodness and compassion inside our hearts. And he's very much for interfaith dialogue. And because he is exiled from his own country, it's enabled him to have more contact with other religions and other kind of philosophies. But he sees that, you know, love and compassion are very central to all religions. I believe compassion to be one of the few things we can practice that will bring immediate and long-term happiness to our lives. Too much self-centered thinking is the source of suffering, and a compassionate concern for others' well-being is a source of happiness. So, I mean, this is pretty clear. You know, center upon yourself, you're not going to be happy. And when you forget yourself and invest in others, that brings happiness. So as I said, his mother, he learned first of all about compassion from his mother. So he's written a book. It's called The Seed of Compassion. It's like a picture book for children. And I'd like to read some of this book. So he says, mine was a family of farmers. My father would spend the day tending to and selling horses, and I would stay at home with my mother and help her with her daily work. We would plant barley, buckwheat, and potatoes, but those were not the only seeds we planted. From the time I was very young, my mother planted in me the seed of compassion by the example she set. She raised me on a diet of love. One of the favorite places for me was to sit on top of my mother's shoulders. From there, I felt like one of my older brothers. I was taller than my father, and getting around was so easy. When I wanted to go left, I would simply tug on my mother's left ear. When I wanted to go right, I would give her right ear a pull. And if she didn't understand my instructions or choose to ignore them, I would kick my legs. Although my mother could not teach me to read or write, I learned so much from her. I was often a naughty boy, but she always treated me with kindness. But that was her nature. She was this way with everyone around her. One year, when there was a famine in our region, and many families did not have enough to eat, my mother gave whatever food to our neighbors and those in need. In this way, she tended the seed of that most important lesson by demonstrating compassion. She showed me as a child that it was possible to treat all people with warm-heartedness and to help ease their suffering. Like a tall tree never forgets the seed it sprouted from, I've often returned to the seed of compassion that my mother planted and which I carried with me as a small child, as a young monk in training, and today as I spread the message of compassion around the world. And now I'd like to tell you a story about when he was traveling by aeroplane. He was flying one night from Japan to San Francisco, and sitting close to him was a couple with two children, a very active boy of around 3 years old and a baby. At the beginning, it seemed the father was helping to look after the children, often walking about with the young boy, who kept running through the aisles. In the middle of the night, the Dalai Lama looked over and saw that the father was fast asleep, and the mother was left trying to take care of the two tired and cranky children by yourself. So the Dalai Lama handed the boy a piece of candy as he noticed the mother's swollen eyes and exhaustion. And when Dalai Lama told this story, he said, I thought about it, and I don't think I would have had that kind of patience. And so the Dalai Lama, he's echoed a topic maybe we've thought about before, and it may take many years of monastic practice to develop, to equal the spiritual growth generated by a sleepless night with a sick child. And so the family, we know, is very important. The family is a school of love. And we know the Dalai Lama is a deeply compassionate person, and he's taken many years of practice. But it's worth considering that maybe the fastest and hardest way to develop your heart of compassion is to be a parent and all the experiences in the family. Now I'd like to read to you about a man who went to prison. And I spoke about this man, Anthony Ray Hinton, last time. In 1985, he was imprisoned for murder, but actually it was an unjust sentence. He'd not murdered anybody, and he was in prison for 30 years on death row. He was released from prison on April the 3rd, 2015. And then a few years later, he wrote this book, The Sun Does Shine, subtitled How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row. So I'd like to tell you a little about what he said. When Anthony Ray Hinton went to death row after a trial that can only be called a travesty of justice, he was understandably angry and heartbroken at how the American justice system had failed him. And he says, when no one believes a word you say, eventually you stop saying anything. I did not say good morning. I did not say good evening. I did not say, how do you do to anyone? If the guards needed some information from me, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I was angry. So how could a man, 30 years on death row, come out and be a completely different person? Well, he says this, going into the 4th year in prison, he says, I heard a man in the cell next to mine crying. The love and compassion I had received from my mother spoke through me and asked him what was wrong. He said he had just found out that his mother had passed away. I told him, look at it this way. Now you have someone in heaven who's going to argue your case before God. And then I told him a joke, and he laughed. Suddenly, my voice and my sense of humor were back. For 26 long years after that night, I tried to focus on other people's problems, and every day I did, I would get to the end of the day and realize that I had not focused on my own. So Hinton, he was able to bring love and compassion in a loveless place, and in doing so, he was able to hold on to his joy in one of the most joyless places on the planet. So one thing we can learn from this is the compassion he received from his mother. That's what spoke to him. When he could see another prisoner crying, his heart was moved. And actually that was the day when his life changed, when he stopped centering on himself and his resentment and his anger, and where he actually became a model prisoner. And he said while he was in prison, he watched 54 people walk by his cell on their way to the execution chamber. He got his fellow inmates to start banging their bars at 5 minutes before the execution. He says, I discovered on death row that the other inmates had not had the unconditional love that I had had from my mother. We became a family, and we did not know if they had any other family and friends there. So we were banging the bars to say to those who were being put to death, we're with you. We still love you right to the end. So he was practicing compassion in prison. So what about self-compassion? I suppose it's difficult to love others if you can't love yourself. So why is that? The Dalai Lama, when he heard that psychologists, they talk a lot about how people like hate themselves, don't love themselves, and have like mental sickness, and he was shocked because I mean, for him, it's obvious that you know we're all created as it is, you know, in God's eyes, and we're all God's children. So how can we kind of deny our own value? I'd like to read this from the book. It says here, modern culture makes it hard for us to have compassion for ourselves. We spend so much of our lives climbing a pyramid of achievement where we are constantly being evaluated and judged and often found to be not making the grade. We internalize these other voices of parents, teachers, and society at large. As a result, sometimes people are not very compassionate with themselves. People don't rest when they are tired and neglect their basic needs for sleep, food, and exercise as they drive themselves harder and harder. And then the Dalai Lama said, people can treat themselves as if they are part of a machine. People tend to feel anxious and depressed because they expect themselves to have more, be more, achieve more. Even when people are successful and grab all the brass rings, they often feel like failures or frauds, just waiting to fall off the merry-go-round. Lack of self-compassion manifests in a harsh and judgmental relationship with ourselves. So we live in a rat race, and there are many pressures upon us. And I would say in my own life as a teacher, there's all these expectations and always things have to be better and better, and you're accountable. And sometimes you just feel you're not good enough. So sometimes I wonder the time we live in, the age we live in, it's like we're losing sight of what life is really about. It's important that we accept ourselves as we are with all our limitations. And because we're all the same, you know, we all have limitations. We should remind ourselves that all people have limitations and feel inadequate in some way. We feel we're the only one that has problems or the only one that's not worth loving, but actually everybody has self-doubt. And if we realize we're all part of the same humanity and we're not alone, then we don't need to feel that we are so bad. And now I'd like to read about a father's compassion. This man here is a translator for the Dalai Lama. He's been translating for many years, and his name is Thupten Jinpa. And actually, he escaped from Nepal. Is it Nepal? Yeah, Nepal. As a child, and he lived in the children's village for many years without his parents. But he became, he trained as a monk. But later in his life, because he really wanted to study, he actually ended up in America. And he also wanted to have a family. So he wrote a book called A Fearless Heart, How the Courage to be Compassionate Can Transform Our Lives. And he knows all about meditation and how that can develop internal joy. But when he became a father, he realized it's a whole different situation. This is his family. He has 2 daughters, an American wife, and this is him posing with the Dalai Lama. And this is what he says. Becoming a father helped me to make real many of the sentiments around compassion that we as monks visualize and imagine. In relationships you have with colleagues or teachers, you're not completely exposed from the personal side, whereas in the context of family life, you are as bare as you can be. My youngest daughter was completely unmanageable sometimes. I remember getting caught being very angry and frustrated. In the face of an infant's immediate need, a loving parent is completely there for that child. That unconditionality, that total presence, is the quality of mind and heart that compassion and meditation tries to cultivate for all beings. So I think, to be a parent, this is, well, the family is a school of love. So these different realms of heart, the realm of the child, the realm of the brother and sister, the realm of husband and wife, the realm of parents, all this is training to develop a heart of love and compassion. But of course, we need spiritual practices. And so that's why through his life, meditation is part of that. But for him, meditation was not everything. He had to also learn in his daily life how to overcome the challenges of being a father. So, some final words. This is a book I've referred to before called Voices of Love from the Light. And this is messages from 20 people in the spiritual world. Philip Burley, who is a trance medium, he was put under hypnosis by a hypnotist, Dolores Proyet. And Philip Burley actually is a blessed member. He was the first national leader in America many years ago, but he's still a member, but because he's a medium, he's pursued this path and written several books. And this book I would particularly recommend because it's very principled, and I would say gives a lot of great insights. So one of these people is a Chinese Buddhist saint called Kuan Yin. She's kind of on par with she's like Mother Mary of the East. And she said some really interesting words. She says, when you see all people as yourself and treat every person with compassion, tenderness, kindness, care, and love, you have reached the Buddha state, the Christ state, the God state. And we refer back to Father's words and the divine principle. It's like when you see yourself in other people, when you see yourself in them, it stimulates your own heart. And that experience that you feel for that person, it resonates with you, and you feel this love and this compassion. So this is what we're all striving for. All these different different aspects of joy is we want to reach this state where we are one with God. And so that's why love and compassion is central to this. And with that, I'd like to finish. Thank you very much.